This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From beautiful design templates and custom domains to full-blown e-commerce, email campaigns, powerful analytics, and now scheduling that you can set up in minutes, Squarespace is the place to go for all of your website needs. There's just no way around it. When the EOS R first arrived in 2018, it was already uncompetitive when measured against what Canon marketing promised. Severe 4K crop, no IBIS, a single card slot, a multifunction bar that didn't quite work, 30 megapixels when 42.5 was the new normal. You may remember. It was like watching an episode of Star Trek. Think the Squire of Gothos. Maybe you know it. A very powerful being creates a world based on information that has taken so long to reach him across deep space, light years, that when he snatches Kirk and Zulu from the bridge of the Enterprise and beams them down, the 23rd century spacemen find themselves in an 18th century setting. The being, Trelane, General, retired, just doesn't understand why these inferior life forms aren't as delighted with what he's done as he is with himself.
Now you will behave yourself hereafter, won't you? Or I shall be very, very angry.
Okay, that was really snarky. Rewind. How about this one? Who mourns Adonais? Perhaps an even more powerful being, the actual god Apollo of Greek mythology, you have to suspend your disbelief, is now the last of his kind. His fellow gods have slowly disappeared one by one, fading into irrelevance as humanity has evolved. He is now the sole inhabitant of a planet far from Earth, with no one to worship him. When the Enterprise happens by, he grabs it with a giant green hand, insists that Kirk and his crew destroy the ship, and beam down permanently to worship him in exchange for a life of paradise.
What is it you want?
You will worship me, as your fathers did before you.
Kirk says, in essence, no thanks. We don't need you or your opinion anymore on how things should work. Apollo throws a fit, loans pre-production R5s and 6s only to Canon ambassadors, camera retailers, and a single excellent YouTuber or two with the proviso.
There are a few provisos, a couple of quid pro quos.
Oh, wait. I'm getting things confused. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and today I want to talk about Canon's official announcement of the R5, R6, and 4 new lenses. I will just cut to the chase. There's marketing, and then there's ham-fistedly trying to control the narrative. So let me come at this from another angle. Seriously, one last attempt. The great one, hockey player Wayne Gretzky, famously said, "Skate to where the puck is going, not where it has been." This is really hard to do, which may be why he was called the Great One. But credit where credit is due. With the R5 and R6, I think it clear that Canon has tried to figure out not only where the market would be today, but where it would be tomorrow. Which is fascinating on its own when you think about it, because among other things, Canon apparently figured, 1, breakthrough IBIS would be more important than megapixels, especially for video, at least at launch. Sure, they'd have rough sensor parity, and at least from a stated resolution perspective, they would, at 45 megapixels, save for the fact that Sony released its 61 megapixel A7R4 before the R5 could launch. Though, to be fair, 45 megapixels in real life are certainly enough to compare reasonably to 61. But it is the 8 stops of image stabilization that, to be confirmed out in the wild by independent reviewers, though already, as it turns out, one of those provisos, this would be the case only when used in conjunction with Lens IS, which in the overall scheme of things is not a big deal. Anyway, 8 stops of image stabilization could be the single biggest usable differentiator for these cameras today. Well, either that's what they figured, or they figured that's what they could do. In any case, I think the ambition to deliver class-defining in-body image stabilization was a great call. I'm looking forward to finding out just how good it is once they're shipping, because it just might materially change the frequency with which we use gimbal-type shots, given that we might no longer need a gimbal. 2. Canon figured most people wouldn't mind less than 24 megapixels for the lower-priced R6, especially if those megapixels were great. I think this is another excellent call. Taking the 20 megapixel sensor from their DSLR flagship 1DX Mark III, which, it's fair to say, blows Canon's earlier 21 megapixel full-frame sensor, first found in the Canon 5D Mark II, out of the water. It was a capital idea. Get it? Capital, investment, leveraging investment. We've learned that even a 20 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, the one in the Panasonic G9, is good for a pair of 40-inch wide prints hanging on one of our walls upstairs. Which doesn't mean that there aren't times when 45, 50, or 100 megapixels aren't better. Just not for 99% of us 99% of the time. I'm willing to assume that the R5 and R6 will be competitive stills cameras. No more than competitive, save possibly for the IBIS, but I think that's fine. Canon hasn't been trying to convince us of anything other than that. 3. Canon figured they'd better have something sexy for the video specs war and decided 8K was the answer, which is an indictment of so many of us, candidly, for focusing on a ludicrous spec rather than what we're trying to accomplish narratively and visually. Even if the processing and storage overheads would be enormous, even if one could only record for a few minutes at a time once the first thermal cutoff was triggered, not just at 8K, but 4K too. If the R5 will do even those numbers, because ideal conditions like the ones in Canon's one-pager to the retailer are almost never how real life works. Thank you, my friend Max Yuriev and others. Canon, you do not get a cookie for handing out the R5's thermal cutoff specs to a retailer. This is just not a good look. Though, to be fair, from a pure quarter-to-quarter business perspective, I can see how difficult it would be to justify cannibalizing sales of the actively cooled 4K 120p recording $11,000 C300 Mark II. For people who need it, that camera makes a lot of sense, and it's proven. Marketing decisions aside, product development is challenging for any company. Maybe, as it came down to the wire, the investment required for the new body Canon might have wanted to build, one with active cooling, just became too risky given the current economic climate. You know the one. The climate where camera sales are down 65% year over year, Canon profits down 80% year over year in the first quarter of 2020. Although, maybe that kind of quarter-to-quarter thinking is what brought them there. Or maybe Canon thought they'd have a new codec by now that would be far more efficient and easier enough to process on current hardware. I don't know. I do understand that 8K gives Canon bragging rights vis-a-vis the 6K recording Panasonic S1H and puts some pressure, maybe, on Sony's practically unicorn A7S III. And, to change metaphors, I do get that tea leaf reading is really, really hard. But I would have passed on 8K altogether. I don't think it does anything for Canon's credibility to offer a spec list with a pile of asterisks that make it impossible for workaday pros to really use it. Though, if you're part of a National Geographic or BBC Blue Planet team in the Arctic, I guess thermal cutoffs don't much matter one way or the other. Your fingers will give out first. 4. Canon figured that with the much more performant 1DX3 sensor, especially when it comes to ISO and dynamic range, they could energize the enthusiast sports and wildlife market, maybe astrophotographers as well, with long, light, accessibly priced telephoto primes with maximum apertures of just f11. I think this just may be brilliant. Though single focal length lenses are hard for soccer parents, even pro sports shooters, because they pretty much require a fixed distance between the photographer and the action. Zooms actually make much more sense most of the time. Still, for pros covering, say, the diving competition at a Summer Olympics, well, depending on how good they are optically, Canon may have done something unthinkable just a couple of years ago, cannibalize their own high-end glass. I mean, think about it. ISO 1600 on a current generation sensor on a bright summer day, yielding 1/3200th of a second at f11 using the rule of Sunny 16. That's doable. Although I'm only about halfway through and my head hurts. Perfect time, I think, to give a shout out to our friends at Squarespace. With their elegant layouts, click, drag, and drop interface, customization tools, excellent support, and more, Squarespace makes it a cinch for photographers and content creators, really any small to mid-sized businesses in any industry, to have an outsized presence on the web, and that has never been more important than now. Squarespace can literally have you up and running in minutes with a beautiful website and custom URL tailored to the way you want to present yourself. They really understand what it takes to build your online identity and grow your business. When you're ready to move beyond your basic site, Squarespace has you covered with their fully integrated and extensible platform. We know. Not only do we use Squarespace for our production company, blog, documentary, and personal photography sites, but we've integrated email blasts and commerce. We book our street photography workshops, sell our Streets of New York book, and just now have set up scheduling for those new one-on-one live video sessions I mentioned earlier, all through Squarespace. It just works. Not a systems admin in sight. Which doesn't mean I don't have questions, but again, Squarespace's customer service is terrific. So, hop over to squarespace.com/Hugh for a free trial and get an extra 10% off your first website or domain purchase when you're ready to really give it a go by using the discount code Hugh at checkout. Again, that's squarespace.com/Hugh and discount code Hugh at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace. The question is, what do we really have with these two cameras at launch? Which wouldn't be such a big question if Canon weren't so adamant about controlling the narrative. The reality is, right, we simply don't know, and won't until independent reviewers have significant hands-on, unfettered time with production units. Thank you, Tony and Chelsea Northrup, for making this point and for your advocacy. To be fair, beyond Canon's caveats and provisos, it would be reasonable to expect the usual teething pains accompanying new cameras or componentry. Especially when the industry has increasingly relied on early adopters as beta testers, but if we hold all of that aside, in theory, at a practical level, the R5 and 6 hold out the tantalizing possibility that they are highly competitive, possibly the best 4K recording anyway, hybrid cameras on the market today. Except, as we now know, they have a 30-minute recording limit, even without thermal cutoffs and tiny, utterly unreliable and unsuitable micro HDMI ports if you intend to use them regularly with external monitors or recorders, which makes them unusable for the kind of interviews, say, that we do. Of course, your mileage may vary, and that's fine. Still, the R5 is certainly being positioned as a smaller, lighter, better in some ways Panasonic S1H for the same $4,000 price. Better autofocusing, perhaps the critical advantage. Better IBIS, in theory. Higher resolution for stills. Equally good, if different, ergos. More glass, smaller and more accessibly priced. Some of it anyway. And then there's 8K. But how many times before have I said this? Forget about 8K. I certainly said this almost 3 months ago in this video, because even then it was clear it wouldn't be usable for 99% of us 99% of the time due to processing and storage overheads. And, of course, this was before we knew about thermal cutoff issues. Then again, most of us can forget about 6K too. I've said that before, because the resolution bump over 4K will usually not be worth the incremental investment in processing power and storage either. The R5 matches the S1H's 5.7 million EVF, has a flippy screen, though the S1H's also tilts, and likely feels as good and as intuitive in hand. I guess. I wouldn't know with certainty, but I was a Canon shooter for 40 years, did a hands-on with the original R, and still love my 1D. Which is saying something, actually, because the S1 triplets all feel incredibly well built, all of the controls well weighted, precisely where they should be. Actually, like this one. On the other hand, S1H beats the R5 because it has no recording limit, does have a full-sized HDMI port, and is the most buttoned-up full-frame mirrorless camera on the market in terms of ergos, functionality, and usability. Yeah, autofocus not so much. But that's a strategic technology issue, and doesn't matter much anyway to workaday DPs. How many cine lenses do you know that autofocus? I know of one. On the other hand, Panasonic is one of the few companies that generally does not treat its customers as beta testers. Those guys do the work beforehand. Which doesn't change the fact that one could also imagine the R5 as a smaller, lighter, better IBIS and autofocus equipped Panasonic S1R with an equally capable high-resolution sensor. Probably. At about the same price. You could think of the R5 as a better and more balanced hybrid than the Sony a7R IV, Nikon Z7, or Leica SL2. Its ergos, IBIS, and video superior to the Sony, if offering marginally lower resolution and a less complete lens line at this point. Its autofocus, IBIS, ergos, and dual card slots superior to the Nikon, though this is unlikely to persuade many Nikon shooters to switch. Its autofocus, IBIS, price, and breadth of lens offerings better than the SL2, though this is unlikely to persuade many Leica shooters to switch either. Then again, you could also think of the R5 as a superior autofocusing, better built, better EVF, IBIS, and sensor-equipped full-frame GH5 with, however, a 30-minute recording limit, a micro HDMI port, and overheating issues that the GH5 doesn't have for 3 times the price of the actual GH5. Or a better EVF and IBIS-equipped, marginally better autofocusing full-frame X-T4 for 2.5 times the price. By a company which may be better positioned financially to ramp up a new generation of high-performance, video-friendly lenses that Fujifilm is in the early stages of doing itself. Let's just say that there is a lot of room between what the R5 could be and what we know it is thus far. As for the $2,500 R6, well, for now, this would be the one, of these two anyway, to get for most of us, if it's all that it's cracked up to be. Unless you're a stills photographer only and want the extra megapixels. I completely understand. Either camera is a much easier sell, I think, for stills-only shooters, especially those of us who already have and love a huge EF lens collection. Though Canon is using the same pricing model for the R6 in particular that they did with the original R. Charge more than anybody else because... why? Hold that thought. At the very least, on first blush, one could say that the R6 is the camera the EOS R should have been at launch. I think that's fair. A camera that finally gives the non-image stabilized RF 51.2, 85 1.2, and 28 to 70mm f2 the body they deserve. Or one could think of it a better autofocusing, better IBIS and EVF equipped, better video spec, flippy screen equipped, more ergonomic Sony a7 III, without as complete or compelling a native lens line yet, which is a big deal. Sony has not squandered its 5-year head start in the full-frame mirrorless space. One could think of the R6 as a better autofocusing, dual card slot, and better IBIS-equipped Nikon Z6 with more glass at the long end, but without the incredibly performant, excessively priced 1.8 primes that the actual Z6 has on tap. At least not yet. One could think of it a smaller, lighter, better autofocusing, better IBIS-equipped Panasonic S1 with inferior EVF that will nonetheless likely be more appealing to some Canon shooters. Though in every case, you'd pay a premium right now for the R6 between $500 and $700. What did Canon offer the R4 at launch again? Yeah, $2,300. What is it selling for right now? $1,800. By comparison, the Sony a7 III is still selling at its launch price of $2,000 2.5 years later. In the end, Canon has superficially spec'd and is certainly marketing the R5 and R6 as the cameras to A, put the hurt on all of their full-frame competitors, forcing them to meet or exceed Canon in ways that cost a lot of time and money, like tooling, new glass, and new competencies. B, slow the defection of Canon's existing user base as its members migrate to mirrorless. And C, capture sales from other brands, probably most especially Nikon, as their user base migrates for the same reason. As I suggested earlier, the buzz around the R5 in particular just might generate an uptick in cinema EOS camera sales too. But this launch could be a second black eye to Canon marketing for over-promising and under-delivering again. More importantly to me personally, what is unequivocal is that they have not been transparent. They have attempted to control the narrative to a degree I've not seen before. And they are accepting pre-orders before there are any independent reviews, while charging more for the privilege. At a moment in time when health and economic realities for so many of us mitigate against business as usual. With all of this said, I think the R6 could be a camera in which we are interested. Though at this point, my hope is that the cameras are good enough that Canon can overcome the already ham-fisted attempt to bypass independent assessments. But the most interesting thing of all, to me anyway, I think the R5 and R6 may well lead people to revisit crop sensor systems, especially the Panasonic G9 and Fujifilm X-T4, maybe defer a purchase decision until they've seen the next iteration of each. If Panasonic's next G9 or GH5 incorporates performant hybrid phase detect autofocus without the usual teething pains, and can be powered via USB-C while shooting with no recording limit on either, or if Fujifilm's, call it XH2, finally puts it all together in one body, again, no recording limit, no USB-C dongles needed to use headphones, a full-sized HDMI port, IBIS fine-tuning, the resulting crop sensor packages with lenses will be smaller, lighter, less expensive, and practically speaking, about as capable in the real world as any of these full-frame systems for video, especially at anywhere near base ISO, which is where you want to shoot anyway. You might want to hold that thought. Thanks again to Squarespace.com for making this episode of Three Blind Men and an Elephant possible. For all of your website needs, if you're a small or mid-sized business, a solopreneur, Squarespace is the place to go. Get your free, no-strings-attached 14-day trial at www.squarespace.com/you. And if at the end you decide you really love it and are ready to go for it, save 10% by using the discount code HUGH at checkout.